Piracy has always been that one odd topic on the channel that kind of might be there but really isn't discussed. And by that I mean, as you all might know, I have a lot of tutorials on here that show you all how to modify a game console. Now, depending on the game console, depending on the modification, most of the time that also means that you'd be able to play backup games, which in turn, if it's not something that you have backed up yourself or legally own, you could also just pirate whatever piece of software it is and play it on there. Now, due to that, I normally never link anything that might be pirated in the description. I normally try and remove anything I see that might be affiliated with piracy with a direct link or anything of the sort, and also because of YouTube's guidelines, terms of use, and because of my own moral type things, I really don't believe in having everything be pirated, so I kind of try and steer clear of that. However, I'm not completely oblivious to what's going on. Now, the flip side of that is I have made a few topics discussing this. I have done an episode of Mod Chat where Daniel and I talked about piracy. I've also made a video about piracy a few years ago, and I figured I should bring it back due to the fact that about a month ago, I actually ended up making a really long post on the 3DS Hacks subreddit about 3DS piracy discussion, and quite a few people enjoyed that post. I feel like I made some good points there despite being starving while I was writing it. And if you're interested in reading that, because this is not going to be a direct retelling of that, I'm going to have the permalink to it down in the description here. But this is more an overall discussion as to my thoughts on piracy and how it could actually be good and what all it has done for the industry as a whole. Now, first off, I don't want this to be a blanket statement of me saying it's okay to pirate whatever it is, because that's actually the opposite of what I'm trying to say. But I'm saying from a legal standpoint, it's probably not legal, but from a moral standpoint, I'm not 100% against it, because I've seen a lot of good coming from piracy. For example, kickstarting digital sales of music and bringing the price down on it to the point where we could download individual songs and legally purchase them. Back at a time when an entire album was $20, you could only get it in store, and you probably only bought it for one or two songs. But it's also done quite a few bad things as well, most notably Suicide Watch DRM on systems, on games, that ends up hurting the consumer who actually goes out and pays $60 for a game. Some good examples of this would be SimCity, the latest version of it, as well as Diablo 3 with the Air 37 code. One point I'd like to make here is that no matter what industry you are trying to consume digital media in, whether it be a TV show, a movie, anything of the sort, for example, a game, or even music, it's getting to the point where because of piracy, a lot of that stuff has been kickstarted and has even evolved into streaming, whether it be illegally and then later on converted over to legal type things. And that is due to the fact that now we live in a world of instant gratification and constant evolution thanks to the technology that we're surrounded with. You know, about 10-15 years ago, as I said, we could really only get albums on a cassette tape or a physical CD. Now at this point, we can pre-order an album, have it downloaded onto our phone, and have it, be all in the cloud and just surrounding us. And by the way, I might have cringed a tiny bit saying that due to the fact that I hate cloud as a buzzword, but enough said, that's what kind of gets it out there, and enough people kind of understand what cloud means when you mention that. However, back when I saw a huge resurgence in piracy and really saw it become mainstream, this was at the turn of the millennium, mainly when dial-up was still a thing, CD burners were still new, and people were just getting DSL and broadband. The music industry was completely flipped around due to piracy. As I mentioned earlier and several times here, at this point, most people only wanted a single from an album. Now, at this point, you could also buy a single CD for maybe a few dollars, but a lot of people didn't do that. They went out to buy the album, and albums ranged from $15 to $20 in price, which, added up to quite a bit, especially if you were only wanting an album for one or two songs here or there. So what happened at that point was there was an application called Napster that ended up coming about and became extremely mainstream thanks to a lot of media coverage, news coverage, and also colleges. What happened was this was the first really big platform that allowed for easy peer-to-peer transfers of music and just something that was really easy to use as opposed to using shady websites, downloading these weird types of formats, risking getting a virus, using IRC, or anything of the sort. And at this point, honestly, it was more hailed as a service where you could just download all the music you want to for free. Instead of buying a full CD, you could just download the songs that you wanted to. Instead of paying for it, you got them all for free. And instead of having these physical, expensive circular discs, you had everything on your hard drive that might have been, 8 to 10 gigabytes in size. And almost the worst thing about this was that people did not know that they were committing crimes because this was a whole brand new thing that had never been launched into the mainstream. As I said, piracy had always been there in some form or another, but we had never seen it to this scale, and it was rampant especially on college universities and campuses. Now what the industry saw was that this was a completely untapped resource right there, and people were evolving. People no longer wanted to pay for an entire album just to get a few songs. They wanted that instant gratification, even if instant gratification meant that yes, you might have to spend an hour or two downloading a song due to your internet connection. Around this time, a few years later, iTunes ended up coming about, and they were a service that allowed you to legally purchase music, and instead of downloading an entire album or going out to have the physical album, you could just pick and choose what songs you wanted, most of the time for 99 cents a piece. This evolved later on as well too to many other things we have, such as streaming via Spotify, even YouTube, Google Play Music, anything of the sort, and even recently within the past year, it has changed so dramatically to the point where album sales are down, but streaming sales have just completely gone through the roof. I use that term lightly because a lot of people, when they end up streaming, they don't pay for the stream. They just listen to it from Spotify or Google Play Music using, a legitimate source like that, but that did not count originally for sales. Now the RIAA has actually had to go back, and now they end up counting streaming as sales using some new type of algorithm, because as I said, it's gotten to the point now in 2015, 2016 that people really don't buy albums as much as they used to. Now, a lot of people who have grown up and evolved through this time might have remembered some examples in school where some people might laugh at a kid because that kid ends up getting asked where milk comes from, and instead of saying milk comes from a cow, they say milk comes from the supermarket, and they get laughed at. I feel like now at this point, with a lot of kids being born now, and even some kids that are just a few years old, as they grow up, they're going to be absolutely shocked that music is actually a medium that you have to pay for, especially when you could either use Spotify where you could get it for free with ads, or you can use another service like Spotify Premium or Google Play Music where you pay a flat fee per month and you can stream all of the music you want without individually paying for it. People are going to think more of music as a service as opposed to something that you have to actually purchase and consume. Now, the interesting thing about this is you're seeing a lot of other mediums just do the same thing, whether it be now or in the past few years. For example, Netflix and Hulu are now available for TV shows and movies. A lot of people wanted that instant gratification of being able to download and watch something on their computer, and now for a small fee per month, you can end up charging a flat rate to your credit card or whatever you're using, and then you can stream as many movies and TV shows as you want from whatever platform you are paying for. As I said, at this point, some notable ones are Netflix and Hulu for TV shows and movies. Spotify and Google Play I've already mentioned for music, and you're also seeing the same thing on games, but it's not being done extremely well. Yes, there is GameFly and there is Redbox. So Redbox, you're able to go to a physical location, access the box there, while as GameFly, that is end up getting shipped directly to your door. However, you also run into another issue that I have not talked about. All of these services are not available worldwide, so there are other places where not only piracy might be legal, but even if they want a legal alternative that will directly support all the developers and be squeaky clean, they might not have it available to them, so they might just have to pirate whatever it is if they don't want to pay, an extremely inflated cost for whatever medium they're trying to consume. Now, there used to be some other services, one of them being GameTap, where you were able to end up paying a flat fee per month and you could stream games. You're also seeing this with PlayStation Now, but GameTap ended up failing because it was just too progressive really early on when people's connections weren't up to par, and even PlayStation Now has its faults, and it can't stream. From what I know, I don't even know if it can stream, current generation games properly over the connection, because you run into another issue that not all connections, even in the US, in Canada, over in Europe, wherever you are watching this or intaking this from, not all connections are going to be equipped for this, and that's another thing that worldwide we're going to have to get up to par with. However, from what I've seen, in my opinion, and I hate saying this because I really don't like the company that much, but I think the best service out there for any type of game streaming medium of some kind or a consumption of games for a flat fee would be EA Access. Essentially, that is, you can either pay for a monthly membership, maybe a 3-month membership, I'm not sure, or you can pay for a 12-month membership and you pay that flat fee. Any games that are in the library at that time for EA Access, you can just download, and as soon as you have your account right there all set up, you're able to play them until your membership expires. These are the full games and there's no restrictions on them. Even for newer games, you get discounts if you want to buy them, or if there is an upcoming game that is coming out, you get to play it for free early, and you also get a limited amount of time with it. Some examples might be, for example, when Mayor's Edge Catalyst ended up coming out. If you were an EA Access member, you got the game accessed for 5 days, like before launch, and you had up to 10 hours of playtime to decide if you wanted to buy it, if that was it for you, or anything of the sort. But I feel like at this point, even this deep into the video, I really haven't covered as to why I believe piracy might be an okay medium. I've talked about the convenience of it, and I've talked about people converting over to legal standards, but that's been about it. And for that, I want to tell a few stories, and one of them is going to be one of my own personal stories. For anybody that doesn't know, my all-time favorite band is Tool, and I just have an insatiable love for that band. And that all started with music piracy. You see, when I got onto Tool, I believe I was 11 or 12 at the time, and I was with my best friend. We were in the back of his parents' car, and his sister was driving. She was being really erratic, driving all over the place, just, to freak us out on purpose, and she was blasting Tool's 92 EP Opiate. And I thought they were one of the worst bands I'd ever heard. To me, it was just nothing but noise. It was screaming. I thought it was horrible, and it was being played on a horrible sound system while I thought I was going to die. So not a good experience at all. And I was trying to wonder why people would enjoy this band so much. What happened one night a few weeks later, I was on an internet radio station, and I ended up hearing this song, and it was pretty good. And it kept going on, and it kept going on, and about 5 minutes into it, I was really liking it. So I decided to flip over to that tab and decide to see who was playing it. And to my surprise, it was a song by Tool, and the song was called Eulogy, and that was the first song that I actually really liked by them. The next time I went over to my friend's house, I talked to his sister, and I asked if she could burn me a Tool album. What happened was she ended up burning their 2001 release Lateralis onto a cheap CDR and gave it to me. I decided to listen to it right there, and to be honest, I still didn't like them that much, and I was trying to figure out what I liked about that one song. Eventually, though, I started looking into the band a little bit more, and I started listening to their other singles, mainly Schism, Sober, and a few others, and I thought they were all great songs. I ended up finding out that song Eulogy was on their 1996 Anima album, and I went out of my way to try and purchase it, and that was really the first Tool album that I went out to purchase, and I thought it was an incredible mind and body altering experience. At this point, being a 12 or 13-year-old now, I had never heard anything so well crafted of this sort, and I absolutely fell in love with the band, and I couldn't get enough of them. And admittedly, then at that point, I ended up using some unconventional means to get a hold of their other albums in MP3 forms, mostly due to the fact that their albums were expensive. There was kind of a drought on them at the time, and they were hard to find. Plus, being a 12 or 13-year-old, they were expensive albums, not gonna lie, 15 or 20 bucks. That wasn't something I could just swing around that easily. However, as I kept listening to them and delving into them even further, I started listening to their other albums much more. I was looking for other ways to end up purchasing them because they were one of the first bands where I said I really want to go out of my way to support them and purchase their albums, even though yes, I can illegally pirate them and get them all for free, but I want to have the physical discs. I want to have the best quality I can have available to me. And with that, I started looking into it even more. I started tracking down their other albums, and slowly but surely I started replacing all of my nasty compressed MP3 versions of their albums on my hard drive with the physical versions of them, and soon enough I had their entire collection of albums. This doesn't even include the amount of shirts that I've purchased from them, the concerts I've gone to, the memorabilia I've purchased, and even the multiple copies of CDs and DVDs that I've purchased. At this point, I think I've purchased every single one of their things at least twice, just for collector's purposes really, and because I don't have any self-control when I see something from Tool come up for cheap. The point being is, at this point, I have more than supported the band, and I will continue to support them, and I've even supported their side projects. And you know how that all started out? It started from my friend's sister pirating their albums, giving me one of their albums from a shitty MP3 rip burned onto an equally shitty CDR, and then me finding a love for the band and going out and getting all that stuff. In fact, the funny thing with that story is, at one point, I ended up approaching his sister again after not talking to her for a while, and I told her about all of this. Maybe not in as great of detail, but I did tell her about them being my favorite band and how this all convinced me in my journey to that point, and she was utterly mind blown. mostly due to the fact that she did not think her at 16 or 17 could convince someone as young as me or influence them in that way, and all of this happened right under her nose. And as I said, this all started off with a shitty burned copy of Lateralis. Now, although that story might appeal to some people, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are also more into gaming than music, and they don't really understand the appeal to that. And with that, there's a few other things with gaming as well too, mainly being, for example, Steam being probably one of the best digital download platforms on the PC. And a few things have directly contributed to that. One of them is the ease of use of Steam and how everything is effortlessly there and categorized all nicely in your library, or however you choose to categorize everything. And the second piece to that is also the price. A lot of people end up getting discounted games through Steam sales, and Steam was one of the first companies to really revolutionize this, because they realized that they could bring in a lot more money and generate a lot more sales if they just brought down the price on their games. Something that the other industries had tried a few times or had not tried and they didn't think of. Same as even the app industry, for example, on phones. When apps were a brand new thing, they were charging $20, $30 for apps. Then they realized they could actually make a lot more money and sell a lot more instances of their app if they just drop the price to like $1 or $2 per piece. Now, I have countless examples of games right here, but one of them mainly being Undertale, and this is because this is one of the more recent pieces that I've had experience with. Now, I've played Undertale twice, and I think it is a pretty good game. What happened was originally I had thought about getting it, but at this point I really don't pirate any PC games, mainly due to the fact that even I myself, I would rather just wait for a sale and conveniently pay my few dollars to get a legitimate copy of the game as to going out, finding a copy of the game illicitly, downloading it, cracking it, maybe installing a few cracked updates, and then not being able to play online easily if I want to. But then again, that's just me. But my point is, I think I would rather spend the $4 or $5 on a game to support it legitimately as opposed to going out and trying to find a way to steal it. But going back to Undertale, this is actually a game I had had on my Steam wishlist because I'd heard quite a bit about it, and I could have easily downloaded it, but I just decided not to because I have enough games in my library to the point where I know I'm never going to play all of them in this or 10 other lifetimes. Now, what happened during one of these Steam sales, the game Undertale ended up dropping from $10 to $8, and that still wasn't low enough for me to try and take a chance on this game that I knew I wasn't going to play for a while. However, because it was in my wish list, one of my friends later on saw that I was wanting it and ended up using his own money to purchase it for me and give it to me as a gift when I logged in next time. I did thank him for it, and if you are listening, I thank you very much. You've done an awesome job of doing that because, hey, it was a good game. I really did appreciate it. Now, what happened was when I talked to him personally about this later on, he even told me that he actually downloaded the game illegally first just to try it out and liked the game so much that he ended up buying his own copy. And when he saw that I wanted a copy of it, he ended up purchasing one for me as well. And you see what happened right there? There was one copy of the game that he pirated, and he ended up buying minimum 2 copies of it. One for himself to replace his pirated copy, and one for me because he knew that I was kind of interested in it, and it was cheap enough where he wanted to buy it for me. And I say at least 2 because for all I know, he could have bought it for other people. But point is, because of that one pirated copy of the game, at least 2 sales were generated. Now, even with developers recognizing this, at this point, I'm going to share another thing that might be a little bit awkward due to the fact that I had made a video just recently talking about how I normally avoid paying full price for games, and one of the sites that I recommended going to was G2A. And since creating that video and up until now, I've also found out that G2A has quite a big black market, and by that I mean even though you are paying for a legitimate CD key and you feel like you are doing right, there's also an issue there of where those CD keys were obtained, because some of them could have been obtained through legal okay means, while as a bunch of them could have also been obtained illegitimately through stolen accounts and stolen credit cards. And this was mostly brought to light just recently with the creators of Tiny Build between them and G2A. What happened was they created a game called Tiny Build, and there were a bunch of CD keys for this on G2A, equating to about $500,000 of really straight up stolen software being sold on G2A as legitimate software. Now, there's been a lot of responses to this back and forth between G2A and the Tiny Build developers right there, but there was also a founder of a company called Rage Squid, and he's the creator of Action Hank, which they ended up making a response to this. And they said, in quotes, "I'm a game developer with a game on Steam, and please just torrent my game instead of supporting shady resellers. I'll even give you the download link. I understand people aren't always able or willing to pay full price for a game, but seeing people play my game is the most important thing to me. Just torrent it instead of putting money in the wrong hands. And that's when you see the moralities of it as opposed to the legality of it as well too. A lot of creators, a lot of developers would actually just like people to play their game. However, at the end of the game, gaming, music, movies, these are all business aspects, and there is money that is put into these and time. It is not a charity at the end of the day, and that is why these are also things that you do have to pay for. And even when it gets to this, it kind of come into this odd medium of, yes, I bought a legitimate key, but how legitimately was it obtained? And admittedly, I probably have a few of these keys in my Steam library unknowingly up until this point, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that, and there's a lot of other people that are in that same situation. But to us, from the front end, yes, we are buying a legitimate copy of the game that we can obtain on Steam, and that's all we know. And that's where you run into a whole other thing right there. And what I had mentioned even earlier with Undertale is then reflected from this developer, in which he said, "We believe that piracy isn't all bad. If someone pirated the game, likes it, and tells their friends, this game is great, you should try it, those friends who might have never heard of the game might play it and perhaps even buy it. That's good enough for us." Now, the funny thing with this is I feel like there's also a bit of a resurgence back to non-DRM games. And by that, I mean you're seeing one big developer that is still an indie developer, mind you. By definition, they are indie, known as CD Projekt Red, working with a company called GOG, or Good Old Games. Now, technically, they do own that, and that is within their studio. But what they had done with a game called The Witcher 3, which some people might have heard of, was they ended up releasing the PC version on GOG, and they released it with no DRM. So yes, you could go out and purchase the game, then when you add it to your library, there's no DRM in there. Nothing is protected. The game itself is not protected. The DLC is not protected. Nothing like that is protected on there. However, due to no DRM being on that game, it's actually proven to be one of the best-selling games of recent times on PC, even to the point where I feel like some reverse psychology has happened, because I have a few friends that literally pirate everything they get their hands on, and one of the few things they did not pirate, despite it being the easiest thing to illegally download and run, was The Witcher 3. Because for some reason they said, oh, well, you know, I want to go out and support this one, despite this game not needing to be cracked at all. I feel like at the end of the day, what a lot of these companies need to start doing is they need to start recognizing everyone more as people as opposed to sheep and criminals, and realize that this is something that we are wanting. And if people are willing to pay for it, they will pay for it. And you might even be surprised where people who weren't willing to pay for something will go over and convert to that more legal medium. Has it happened overnight? Absolutely not. But over the past 10 to 15 years, I've actually seen a lot of my friends go from legit to pirates back over to legit, just due to the fact that it is so much easier at this point now to pay a little bit of money and go legit. And with people who are still on this whole piracy thing and they just want to go ahead and pirate everything, I just ask, keep it away from me, and I'm not going to be able to change your ways, I believe. However, as I said, I'm also not fully against piracy at the same time. A lot of the times I know that it's hard to get something, it might be easier to get it through a pirated method, or even with all of that, it might just be something where you don't have the funds to obtain it and you just want to enjoy your hobby, and that's fine. Or you want to dabble in something and you can't afford to invest the money in that, because a lot of people I've seen as I've grown up have pirated quite a bit, and then once they have the money to actually go out and buy things, they start going out and buying what they want to consume. And to anybody who might be kind of doubting that, I'm going to ask, how many people out there who are video editors, who are graphic designers, do you really think straight up before they had any type of experience in anything like that went out and purchased a legitimate license for Adobe Photoshop, for Adobe Premiere, for Sony Vegas? Most likely, most of them ended up going to their favorite torrent site, firing up a torrent program, and downloading whatever version of that software was out, the latest one with the most seeds, and ended up applying a crack to it. But a good amount of the time, I've also seen many of these people, if it's something that they end up crafting and they do well enough into the point where they could actually start charging commissions for it, they later on go and they become legit. They get rid of their pirated versions and they purchase a legitimate version of it if it is within their budget, and especially if they are making money off of their work that they're doing. But in order to do that work, they had to get good at it and they needed practice. And for that practice, sometimes a 30-day trial is not going to do that well. You are going to need the full version of it, and if you can't afford at that time to to spend a few $100s on a license, you might have to go out and get a cracked version of whatever software it is. And to anybody who might say, oh, well, those people should have just gone legitimate to begin with, I really have a doubt on that due to the fact that a lot of people over the years and at different jobs I've worked with have had quite a vast array of skills in whatever they were working with, and most of them had developed these skills from pirated software that later on they ended up getting rid of or ended up replacing. But I guarantee they probably would not have gotten that skill set so early on and would have been able to craft it well enough if they had not pirated those initial versions of software that they had worked with and then later on transitioned to legitimate type things and brought them into the workforce. So at the end of the day, wrapping this up, I do believe that piracy has hurt people, but it's also helped out industries as a whole and has really changed people. And while as it has not been an overnight thing, it's been a lot like planting a tree. When you plant a tree and keep watering it, you're not going to see any progress, and it's just going to stay dormant, and it might fail the first few times. But if you keep at it and you keep going and you nurture it, it's going to end up blooming into something beautiful. And that is what we've seen with this resurgence back over to legitimate type means and consumption of digital media. And my final point on this is really, if you end up pirating something because you want to give it a try or you don't have the means of purchasing it and you end up really enjoying it, support the developers, because they still need your financial help with all this, despite how many sales there might be. Plus, you'll be doing some good for the world. Anyways, this is Mr. Mario signing off. Thank you for watching, everyone, and let me know what your thoughts are on this.